our guest is Kent Evans.
Leadership in the home has to be the bedrock. It has to be the starting point.
Live your faith and pass it on. Share the gospel clear and strong. Stand for, claim your heritage of truth.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. Today our guest is Kent Evans. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Now Kent is the author of a new book called Wiseguy, and you're the co-founder of Manhood Journey. Why don't you tell us what that is?
Manhood Journey is a ministry to fathers and sons primarily, and the objective is to help fathers disciple the next generation of godly young men.
What a fantastic ministry. That is so needed.
It is needed.
Now what
Sure.
about for the boys who don't have fathers in the home? Is there a provision for them?
It's interesting you ask, because just 2 days ago I was with a couple who were hosting a Manhood Journey group in their home. And I learned for the first time that there's a single lady, and we know this lady in common, and she brings her young son to the Manhood Journey group and drops him off, and he's mentored and gets the relationships with the other young men and the dads in the room, and then she picks him up later.
Wow.
So it's neat to see a single mom using it in that capacity.
Yeah, I think that's so needed because there's so many fatherless
It's
guys
a lot.
in the country. So
True.
many boys, young boys and teens that don't have a dad in the home.
That's true.
Yeah. So how did Manhood Journey get started?
There was a gentleman at our church who said, hey, we have a lot of things going on at church. We don't have anything for fathers and sons. Why not? So a handful of us, volunteers, just went off to the side and wrote on a whiteboard for a few weeks. And we came up with a few different ideas, one of which was, what if we did small group Bible studies that were uniquely written to young men? And the idea was they weren't delivered by a quote-unquote professional. They were delivered by dads in the room. And so we tried to build this content, and we started testing it, and it kind of took off from there.
Good. It sounds like it's working very well.
Yeah.
Now, is it all over the country? Are people using it everywhere, or is it
Yes,
just getting started?
We first started drafting things about 5 years ago, and about 2.5 years ago was our first launch publicly. And in the last couple of years, we've seen guys download our content in 47 states, 9 foreign countries. Best we can figure, it's somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 fathers and sons have connected with the curriculum. And you know God's in all that, because A, we're not that smart, and B, we haven't really had any resource. We don't have an office, we don't have a phone, we don't have a full-time employee, and so God's just chosen to use it around the country and starting to use it around the world.
What a fantastic ministry. That's wonderful.
It's been fun to be part of.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about your youth?
My youth was, in some ways, very prototypical. Played a lot of baseball, grew up with, parents who were always at the ballpark and, that kind of thing. And so I have, in some ways, a classic American upbringing. Sadly, I also have a classic American divorce. So I went through that when my parents were divorced as I was a late teen. And I have 2 older sisters and an older brother. And so I was the youngest of 4. I had the benefit of learning from their mistakes. And they would admit to all these. But, I had the joy of watching good and bad things happen. And I could learn from those as I grew up. But yeah, in some ways it was really classically an American upbringing in that context.
Mm-hmm. But wasn't there a youth director or somebody who had a significant influence on your life?
Yeah, I had a counselor when I was late teen, when my parents went through a divorce, and this guy was super sensitive and smart, and he said something to me that was, I think, changed my life. Like, I kind of imagine when I get to heaven, God may show me my life, and it would be fun if he showed me these elements, that some of which I thought were great, that were bad for me, and some of which I thought were bad for me, that were great, and so forth. So I envisioned this big tote board, and on the board there will be a shining dot when I met Weldon, this counselor, because Weldon said to me, well, Ken, I understand you're really frustrated about where your parents have ended up. I understand you don't want to be that when you grow up, but you cannot become the unsomething. And I kind of got it, but he elaborated and said, you focus on what you don't want to be, and life turns you into something much worse. He goes, your brain can't process that. And so I said, well, what do you recommend? And he said, well, find people who have what you want. Find men who are at a stage in life ahead of you that can teach you something, and that's pretty much everybody, and learn from those guys and build a new picture of what you do want to be when you grow up. Stop trying to run from one thing and not be this. Go figure out what you do want to be. I probably can't overstate the impact that had on me.
And is that how Wiseguy came about?
Pretty much, yeah, because what I started doing late teens on into my 20s is I was looking for guys started looking for, hey, why does this guy have a family that seems to get along really well? Or why does this guy have a good golf game? Or, just whatever the range might have been. And I developed this appetite for learning from other guys.
That's good. So does that take a bit of humility to be able to
I
do
guess.
that?
I mean, I don't know that people would naturally describe me as Joe Humble, right? Probably a lot of people would describe me as the opposite. I think it at least takes an inquisitiveness, right? I don't know if it's, I guess there's a humility component, but it at least takes an awareness that someone else knows something I don't know. It takes a willingness to ask, and maybe a humility and at least being willing to reveal that you don't know. I've gone to guys before and say, man, you and your wife seem to have a great relationship. What is your secret? And it's interesting what kind of conversations that spawns. Yeah, it's been really developmental for me.
Good. Well, you call these mentors of yours wise guys. So why do you think more men don't do what you're doing?
I think it's not encouraged in our society, as an example, American society in particular, because we are individualistic. It's the Marlboro man, it's the free range, and I did my own thing and, started from nothing, and these rags to riches stories. And so we have this kind of culture that says the more you do things alone, the more talented you must be. And that's just flawed and silly logic. But at the end of the day, that's a script we hear a lot. And then I think the other thing is just pride. We don't want to go up. I have a neighbor whose lawn is impeccable. It is perfect. I'd almost rather sleep on it than my own bed sometimes. It's beautiful. And I could walk across the street and just say, hey, Dan, how do you do this? But I haven't, and it's not mainly it's because I hate yard work, but there's that. But there's also just this component that, yeah, I'm not sure I want to go over and just tell him I don't know how to get grass to grow. But he could teach me a ton, right, if I wanted to learn that.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell us some other stories of wise guy moments that you've had?
Yeah, one that's it's one of the ones I enjoy telling, but I enjoy telling it in almost this sort of sick, twisted way because it's so pathetic. It's so bad, and it's so embarrassing, but I had a small marketing company. By small, I mean I was the marketing company at one point, and I had clients I did projects for, and one client I was working for, I was really late on a project, and he was calling me to find out where it was, and I was dodging him. I just didn't return his calls, and I was hiding from him. And the tip in that is if you're going to hide from somebody, don't attend the same church as they do, because it's just too great. Even if it's a big church, it's just too great a risk, right? So one day, we're walking out of church, and I spot him, and he spots me, and he was this really laid-back guy, super quiet, unassuming, and he just goes, hey, Kent, you got a second? And I said, sure. So we went into the sanctuary. It was just he and I in this big sanctuary, and he just said, Kent, I get the sense you're avoiding me, and I think it's because you haven't finished the project, and as a customer of yours, it's frustrating, but as a brother in Christ, I'm really disappointed. I expected better. And, I really hoped he would be irate or, use foul language or do something that I could hang on to that would allow me to blame him for being such a jerk. But in the end, he just told me what I was doing wrong and told me I needed to do better. And today he's a friend. I called him a couple weeks ago and we rejoiced over the book launching, and there's a chapter on him in the book. And so we just had fun reliving that for a moment. But those moments when someone takes enough time and with enough care and with enough concern for you as a person, and they share with you, hey, you're off base. It's just, it's not working, and you're not doing the right thing. Man, those are really valuable. And yeah. I bristle in the moment. I don't like it in the moment, but I can look back on some of those now and realize, man, that guy did me a great service.
So he did it in a loving way, but at the same time, he didn't back off on what he said.
And that's the heart of it, right? That's both the heart and the hard part is that often when we're frustrated with a brother or sister in Christ, we just want to vent. We want to take our anger, and now they've become, it's like we're the metal and they're the magnet. And we're just going to let our anger gravitate toward them. But his heart was not like that. His heart was one of redemption and correction. It wasn't of like ridicule or shame or anger. He was angry, but he wasn't vociferous and wasn't degrading. And he just said, I expect you to double back and fix it. It was great.
Sounds very Christ-like, actually.
It was. I'm telling you, it was a great example of how to pull somebody aside, and it took maybe a minute, 45 seconds. There was no diatribe, there was no long preamble, straight to the point. Here's what I think. You owe me better. Now let's get back on the horse.
How do you try to implement what you learn from the other men?
That's a good question because I don't know that I specifically try to implement those tactics. I do try to emulate their overall behavior. So there are guys, for example, in my life who are, I'm pretty high strung and kind of hyper, as some would call it. I have an old friend from high school who became a child psychologist. And he goes, oh yeah, man, back in high school, if we had today's culture, you'd be on all kinds of drugs when you were 14. That's a great story. Charles, thanks for that. But for me, I see some guys in my life who are quiet leaders, who are really good at being very calm and assured and leading from a position of just quiet command. They don't have to raise their voice. They don't have to get out of control. And I don't know that I can take what those guys do and just perfectly implement it because it's not exactly my DNA. However, they're super effective leaders and I can learn from them. So I'm trying to learn that art. I had a friend tell me a few weeks ago, he goes, you need to learn how to respond instead of reacting. He goes, those are two totally different approaches to life. And so you've got to be able to regulate your heart rate and your blood pressure so that you can respond instead of reacting. And I'm still learning that. I'm not very good at that.
Well, there's a lot of things that it takes all of our lives to learn.
Yes,
Yeah.
too true.
How would you encourage a man who feels like he's not a leader? And I mean, I feel like I really believe that God has made all of us with the potential to lead.
Yes.
So how would you encourage someone like that?
I think part of it is what you just said, is that I think in our culture, and I don't know if this is American or if this is human, but we look at leaders and followers, and we put them in these two buckets where there's a leader and a follower. There's one leader and 1 million followers, or whatever the numbers are. We're all leaders. I mean, God has called each of us to lead in some capacity. It may not be leading a team or leading a business or a ministry, but He's called us all to lead. And it may be just one-on-one. You may be at coffee with your friend at Starbucks, and at that moment, you need to lead because they need your help. Or it might be that you are the big boss at the company and you have thousands of people who report to you. Regardless, we're all called to be leaders. And I think to that point that you made, that's the beginning point. If guys view themselves as, I'm just a follower, and they take this kind of lean back approach toward leadership, then they're off to a tough start because they don't even know they're in the game. They don't even know there's a game being played, and they're in it. So that's the first step, is know you're in this game and know that you're supposed to be playing it. And the second is, it's in our heart, hardwired from God to lead people. Because that's what He does. We are made in His image, which means the characteristics of Him in fully ripe and mature form ought to be characteristics of us. And so He's a leader. He is a leader. And so as men and women, we've got to learn how to lead in a way that is, like that story I shared, in a way that's not to shame others or to control them, but to help call out God's best in their life.
Mm-hmm. That's especially important in a family, isn't it?
And that's where we've really lost it, is that we've got a lot of guys who have figured out how to lead at work, and they haven't figured out how to lead at home. I remember reading Mark Batterson's book, The Circle Maker, and there was a line in there that I've never forgotten, and he just said, I don't care if I'm famous for books or preaching or anything else, I want to be famous in my own home. And I loved this, that turn of phrase has never left me ever since I read it, and that's what I want to be. I want to be famous in my own home. I want my kids, I have 4 boys and a 5th one on the way through international adoption, and my wife to be able to say, yeah, Kent can go out and do the ministry thing, but he never shirks his responsibilities at home. Like, he's a leader here first, everywhere else second, and we've inverted that. We've praised the ego guy or the rags to riches or the guy who becomes president or CEO. We praise that guy while he's on his 5th marriage, and just crazy how we praise one thing and don't praise another. Because in the end, leadership in the home has to be the bedrock. It has to be the starting point.
Mm-hmm. And some of those men are quiet leaders.
Oh man, lots of them.
Yeah.
Lots of them. I can think of 2 or 3 guys in my life who are super talented leaders. They have a lot of scope, a lot of responsibility, and they never ever raise their voice. And it's awesome. And I need to get there. I need to get to that place.
Are all your children that you have right now, natural children? Or
We had 3 children by birth, and
Okay.
they are currently 16, 14, and 12, all boys. And then we adopted 1 young man from Ethiopia who's now about to turn 5 this week. He'll turn 5. And we're back in the
wonderful.
Ethiopian adoption process, really late in the process, so we should travel any month now back over to Ethiopia for son number 5.
That's wonderful. Well, we're adoptive grandparents too. So,
Oh, that's great.
yeah.
Yeah, we've really enjoyed the process of adopting, and our older boys have been, I think, changed forever because they went to Ethiopia with us on the first trip, and so they've experienced the process and have been great big brothers to their little brother.
So they're learning to be leaders.
They are indeed.
Yeah.
They are indeed. They better.
So do you actually do the Manhood Journey Bible studies with your sons?
Yeah, we've done several. Not all of them, full disclosure. We haven't done every single one. We're cranking them out faster than we can do them. My son joked the other night. He said, yeah, my dad's too busy in the ministry to parent me, and we all had a great laugh. And it was nice that I knew there was joking in that. But we have done several of them. We just finished one a few weeks ago and really enjoyed the process. And my boys are engaged participants. In fact, on the way to the Manhood Journey study at this gentleman's house, I said, hey guys, y'all got to ratchet it back a little bit. Y'all know too much about this content. You've seen it all back in the oven and in the kitchen. You know, you've seen it all being baked. And so you can't talk all night. And so they're like, okay. And so after we leave, they're like, Dad, did I say enough or not too much? And so it's kind of funny to watch them process all that.
That's fun. Well, do you have anything else that's coming up that you're working on?
Yeah, we have a big change for us. We went from being primarily an organization that built a small group tool. So we would have a group in the home, and one guy would have a group leader guide, and he would lead the group, to having just released our first and what will become a series of one-on-one guides that dads can do if they're outside of a group context. So if you live in a place or you are in a context where it's hard to pull a group of guys together for whatever reason or schedules get in your way, we've now released a bunch of new tools, and we're releasing more who will help that dad pour into 1 or 2 kids at a time over his kitchen table.
That's great.
Yeah, it's gonna be, we'll see how that goes. You know, we might become more of a ministry focused on those one-on-one tools over time. I don't know. God will tell us. Then maybe even the group tool. We'll see.
Have you translated any of them into other languages?
We translate them into Kentucky. No, I'm just kidding. I'm from Kentucky. We have not yet. No.
Okay. Do you
We
think
looked at
that's
Spanish. You know, probably is next for us. We've had some folks approach us and say, "Hey, I might be willing to help you with Spanish." For us, it looks like a very big undertaking, so we've kind of been very cautious. In fact, at our recent board meeting for the ministry, we had all these priorities, and we said, okay, Spanish translation goes down. It's on the board. We're not going to delete it, but it needs to move down behind a couple other things for now, but we'd
Right.
love to.
translating things from one language to another sometimes is a little difficult because the nuances are slightly
Sure.
different, especially when you're talking about relationships.
Yeah, and when we do physical things where we sometimes do interactive activities with children, and we'd have to see if some of those make sense in another culture, and so I think there'll be a little more to it than just getting words on paper.
I would think so too, yeah. But it sounds like you're doing some wonderful work. Do you have any other books coming out?
Not yet, but we do have a couple on the drawing board.
Okay. Well, where can people find out more about all of this online?
They can go to manhoodjourney.org, manhoodjourney.org, and it has all of our resources and links to the book and all that.
Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thanks, Jeanne. I appreciate it.
Share the gospel.